Foreign ministers of the 10-nation ASEAN grouping have called for unity to tackle the situation in Myanmar. Foreign ministers are meeting in the Indonesian capital Jakarta. On Wednesday, they discussed the implementation of the so-called five-point consensus as a pathway to peace in the country. It's a set of measures agreed to by ASEAN with Myanmar's top general 2 years ago, but whose implementation has since stalled. Indonesian Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi articulated ASEAN's position on Myanmar.
Dialogue will pave the way to political solution. Only political solution will lead to durable peace. We are still very much concerned to see the continuing and increasing violences in Myanmar.
And joining me for more from Jakarta, where the ASEAN meetings are happening, is DW Asia Pacific Bureau Chief Georg Martes. Georg, why is ASEAN such a helpless bystander to the violence in Myanmar?
Well, that is because of the structure of ASEAN. Like many international organizations, when it comes to sovereignty or questions of defense, just like the EU, it is unanimity is needed. So the sovereignty of each member counts and it cannot be overruled. And now Myanmar clearly is a member of that organization. And in addition to that, you have the fact that ASEAN is pretty much split on the question of Myanmar, how to reconnect or how to progress on the talks. On the one hand, you have states like Singapore or Indonesia and Malaysia who would like to stick to the course where they have said we've made an arrangement with the junta, let's push them to pursue that. And then you have other states like the pro-military government still in Thailand that may change in the near future, but still a pro-military caretaker government at the moment, who would like to re-engage with the military junta. And that is also something that is supported, for instance, by, if you want, single-party states like Cambodia.
You talked of this arrangement that ASEAN had concluded with Myanmar. This is the five-point solution that had been agreed to with Myanmar 2 years back, but it's not really been implemented. Could you remind us what its main points were?
Exactly, that's the so-called five-point consensus, and it involves a number of interesting points. Pretty much you can already put in a nutshell that only one condition has been fulfilled, and that is the provision of humanitarian aid. To some extent, that has been successful. The junta, however, has agreed to all four other points, and those include the immediate end to violence. Clearly, that has not happened. The holding of dialogue among all parties, and that would involve the National League for Democracy in Myanmar. And I have been to Thailand, to the border, speaking to representatives of the NLD, and they said there's no chance that they can talk to the military junta. So that is not happening. And then you have the appointment of a special envoy, which is no one less than the Indonesian foreign minister officially at the moment. But she hasn't been able to travel to Myanmar and hold talks. And so you have a number of points where the military junta really has not stuck to the agreement that they've made with ASEAN.
So based on everything you're saying, it appears that this plan is effectively dead. Is that correct?
Well, you have to say that it is the only diplomatic process at play currently that there is at least some form of communication. And the Indonesian foreign minister today made clear that any other efforts must support the implementation of the five-point consensus. So she really wants to push that idea that the military junta is engaged in the way that they have agreed. But yes, of course, the reality on the ground is that this is not happening. And the big question is, how can ASEAN break this stalemate?
Now, the ASEAN meeting of foreign ministers will also expand in the coming days to include discussions with China, for example, on disputes in the South China Sea. Where does ASEAN stand on that?
Yeah, there's an interesting quote from the Philippines foreign minister here who was asked that question, and he said, well, there's no light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to ASEAN's position on the South China Sea. a mutually agreed position. But he said, we can see the tunnel, and that is where we stand. And I think that's a very nice and neat way to describe where ASEAN stands on the whole subject. It's a really complicated matter where there are so many interests involved, where you have concerns on the part of Vietnam about research, Chinese research vessels just in front of their coast, where you have concerns from the Philippines that they have said there's aggressive acts by Chinese military ships engaging in their waters. Overall, you have to say it is China who says, who perceives they are executing their legitimate right because they see large parts of the South China Sea as their sovereign territory.
A code of conduct in the South China Sea has also been proposed to prevent any major flare-up of hostilities, but there has been no agreement on it. Why?
Yeah, that's really complicated. And of course, it is connected, many critics say, to the very fact that China is the biggest investor in Southeast Asia by far. And that is particularly true to countries where some people even say almost crony states, where Chinese investment is so dominant that they also have really huge political leverage in these countries. For instance, in Cambodia, but also in Vietnam, where they can make their voice heard. And so that is a way where critics have said they have simply targeted these countries to block any progress on a real elementary functional code of conduct where ASEAN could agree on a position regarding China and the South China Sea.
We'll leave it there for the time being. Thanks so much, DW Asia Pacific Bureau Chief Georg Martes.